Today we're going to be learning Nedarim Daf Samach Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Hannah Pasternak Shames in honor of her sister Sarah. She's been studying the daf since Bracho 2, wishing her a very happy birthday. Okay, we're going to get started and finish the 9th chapter and finish this section, and we're going to move on in tomorrow's daf to a father and a husband being able to annul the vows of their wives, which is going to take us till the end of the Masechet, really. That topic is going to basically cover the last 2 chapters. And I think it's interesting to see what comes up in today's daf that maybe is a little bit related, at least to relationships between husband and wives. So let's start with the Mishna at the top of our page. And what's nice about this daf, first of all, we're going to have a whole bunch of stories that are, one's going to be a little crazier than the next till we get to the last story, which is a little bit comical, especially for those of us who might be new immigrants in a country, or have a mixed marriage with someone who's an immigrant, someone who's not. You'll see a funny story. But before that, we're going to get to a whole bunch of Mishnayot that we've already seen, which is nice also because it's good review and it's not unfamiliar territory. So the first Mishnah starts with the Mishnah that we've quoted before. Potchim miyamim tovim u'b'shabbatot. So one of the things you can use is a petach. Again, the petach is you have a vow, you go to the chacham or a beitin to undo your vow, and they say, had you known, they kind of suggest things, had you known this would be the ramifications, would you have vowed? And if you say, no, I never would have, then they can undo the vow. So potchim miyamim tovim u'b'shabbatot. Let's say you vow not to eat a certain kind of food, and then it comes Shabbat, and you really want to eat that food on Shabbat, and it's part of Oneg Shabbat, or on the holiday. And they say, had you realized that you weren't going to be able to eat this on Shabbat, would you have taken your vow? And you say, oh no, I never would have done that. So you can dissolve a vow in that way. Comes the Gemara and the Mishnah and says, though, there were 2 stages to this understanding. In the beginning, they thought just those days are permitted. So if you say, I didn't realize this was also going to affect Shabbat, then they say, okay, fine. So all the days of the week, you can't eat this food, but on Shabbat, you can. Until Rabbi Akiva came and then taught everybody, once you partially undo the vow is entirely dissolved. To which the Mishnah now brings a whole number of cases. Now, the first one is very clear why we need this case, and maybe even the second, but then we get off even on a third, and why we have to bring all these examples is a good question, because first of all, we already just brought an example. The Mishnah tries to highlight, like we had, what is nolad v'she'eno nolad, and they gave us example. So here we're going to have a lot of examples, to which they start bringing examples. Amal konam she'eni neheneh lekulchem. If I say I will not benefit from all of you, okay, let's say I'm talking to the people who are listening to me, and I say, I'm vowed from all of you. Now, if I decide, one of you, I get into a situation one day and I want to benefit from you and I want to undo the vow, and I say, oh, I never would have done the vow, and I realized that you were listening to the daf, why I never would have done that. And then once I do that, the rest of you I'm also permitted to. But if I say, but if I say, and if you remember, when we had this example and we quoted this before, we understood this a little bit, not exactly the simple reading, but it's the only way to read this, which is, let's say I won't get benefit from you. And then I say, and the woman next to you, well, she's like you. And the woman next to her, she's like her. And the woman next to her, she's like her. So that basically means, that's what you call hatpasa b'neder, right? I can connect one person who's vowed that I can't benefit from them to another one. So I basically put, and we talked about this last time, it's like an Excel where you have one amount and then you say, oh, this cell is going to be like that cell, and then this cell is going to be like that one, and this one will be like that one, and everyone connects to the previous one. So what happens when you delete one of the cells? Depends which cell you delete. You delete the first one, everything goes to 0. If you delete the middle one, everything before that one will still have an amount in it, and all the ones after that will all become 0. So that's what they say here. Hutar harishon hutru kulam. You get rid of, if you dissolve the vow of the first one, all the rest will be dissolved because everyone's neder was based on the first one. But hutar acharon mutar b'kulan asurot. But the last one, no one was based on the last one because again, I said, I will vow not to benefit from you. And then I say, and her like you, and her like her, and her like her, right? And it goes like that. So if I get rid of the last one, only the last one is permitted. So now all of a sudden, besides just bringing an example of neder shutar muksato tarkulo, we're now getting examples that are exceptions to that rule. Because in this case, they're viewed as, it all depends, right? Like the Excel example. And then there's parentheses, which I think if I remember, I'm not sure, but I think when we read this sugya earlier, we said that this was a braita on the Mishna, and it just ended up accidentally appearing in the Mishna, but it's important to understand either which way, which I already explained, but we'll read it inside. Hutara emtsei, if you take a middle one and you dissolve that vow, hemenu ulamata mutal, from there on in, and everyone that was vowed after her are exempt. Hemenu lamala asul, but everyone before her, since all the people before her weren't based on her, their neder still applies. Next case. If I use a language and I say to each of you, you're forbidden to me like a karban, and you're forbidden to me like a karban, and you're forbidden to me like a karban, then each person individually, because each person had their own language of a vow, and that's not viewed as a neder. That's not like the first case. Kulchem, we had kulchem, all of you. Then we had lizeh ulizeh, and now we have korban lizeh, korban lizeh, korban lizeh. If I use the language of a vow for each one of you, then those are viewed as totally separate vows. And what I do to one has absolutely no effect on the other, even if I said them in one mouthful or one sentence, doesn't matter. Now we get another example. So as I said, not so clear why we need this example, but it's a different type. I forbid wine that I will not drink, because wine gives me bad stomach problems. But wait, they say, but you know that old wine or a particular type of wine is good for your insides, your innards. Now they say, number one, that wine is obviously permitted to you because it's good for you. And you said, I don't want it because it's bad for me. And at that point, since you already got rid of the vow for miyushan, then the vow is dissolved for any kind of wine at all, because that's what we learned. It was one neder on wine, part of it's dissolved, the entire thing is dissolved. Honam batsal, this example really doesn't need to be said because it's just like the previous one, but in any case, the Mishna lists it. I don't have answers why the Mishna brings so many cases of this principle. Konam batsal shani toem, shabatsal ralalev, just like the wine you thought was bad for your stomach, your intestines. Here you think the onion is bad for your heart. Amrulo, valo kufri yapelalev. But wait, there's kufri. Kufri is a type of onion that's good for your heart. Hutar b'kufri, valo kufri bulvad hutar ele b'chol abtsalim. So now you're permitted to kufri, and not only kufri, but any onion. And ma'aseh haya, and here where the Mishnah ends, in case we had the original where they thought only part of it was undone. Then we brought Rabbi Akiva, and we said until Rabbi Akiva came, which kind of sounded like everyone agreed with him, but we didn't really know. But here we actually get an actual case. There was a case like this about onions, and Rabbi Meir actually permitted that person to eat all kinds of onions. So you see that in the end, we hold like Rabbi Akiva. So now the Gemara is going to have a few small questions, and then we'll move on to a new Mishnah. So that was all review because we read this entire Mishnah previously. That's a quote from the Mishnah, but it's a little bit of a tricky quote because the quote is really about the next line, which is korban, right? In the case where you say, I will benefit or I won't benefit, right? You will be a korban to me and you will be a korban to me. That's really the line that they're talking about here. And versus the kulchem case. In other words, the case they quote here is that in between where you said this one's like this one, that one's like that one. It's the one case they're actually not dealing with. They want to know the difference between, there were three cases there, case one and case three, the difference between all of you and the difference between to you a korban, to you a korban, to you a korban. So man tanu, who's the tana that says this? Amar Rabbi Shimon he. This is Rabbi Shimon, who says you're only obligated if you say an oath to each one and each one. Okay, what on earth are we talking about? Luckily, the Ran helps us. And the Ran tells us, if you didn't have the Ran, you could have looked, there's a little dalid, at least in mine it's a dalid. I know sometimes different Gemaras have different signs here, different notations. The dalid takes you to the Masoret Hashas, which tells you could find this in a bunch of different places. And the real place you find it is in Masechet. The original place for this is a Mishnah in Mesechet Shvuot. So if you look in the Ran, Amar Rava Rabbi Shimon he, Da'amal bePerek Shvuat HaPikadon, which it says in parentheses, Shvuot Lamed Vav Amud Bet, Gabei Hayu Chamisha Tovim Oto. Okay, real nightmare. You're standing there and 5 people come and say, you owe me money, right? That's the worst kind of situation you don't ever really want to be in. 5 people come and say, you owe me money, you owe me money, you owe me money, you owe me money, you owe me money. Va'amal, lo lecha, v'lo lecha, right? I say, not to you, not to you, not to you, not to you, and I swear. And then it turns out I lied. So if I lied under oath, I have to bring what's called a karban shvuah. The question is, how many karban shvuahs do I have to bring? Do I have to bring 5 karban shvuahs, or do I have to bring 1? Because how many oaths did I make? So according to our Mishna, what would you say? It depends what you said. If you said to all of you, right, and you said one language of shvuah, of oath, then it would be 1. If you said shvuah lezeh, and shvuah lezeh, and shvuah lezeh, and shvuah lezeh, and I swear to you, 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 if I said to everyone individually, then it would be 5. So that's exactly what Rabbi Shimon holds. So now we see that that's the opinion that matches our Mishnah. So let's read. Okay, you would only obligate an individual, right? Separate korban shvuahs, extra korbanot to bring. You have to bring 5 korbanot shvuah only if I said the language of oath to each of you. Halav hachi, but if it weren't for that, bein bevav, bein lo bevav, klal havi. Whether you said and you, and you, and you, or you, it doesn't matter. If I only said one language of oath, it's only 1 karban shvuah, 1 sacrifice that I'm obligated for. So that's now, if we go back to the Mishnah, so Rabbi says, Rabbi Shimon, now we understand the line, who said, until you say shvuah to each one individually. So that's the same as lezeh korban, lezeh korban, lezeh korban. Okay, now we're going to have the same question on the wine and on the onion case. Konam yain shani toem. Now they say something very important, or something very obvious, I would say, that you might not have thought of, but once they say it, it's pretty obvious, which is, you said, I will not drink wine because it's bad for my intestines or my stomach, or however you call it. And then they said, but wait, this kind of wine is good for you. Now, what if they just said this kind of wine is not bad for you? No, this doesn't cause you stomach problems. So that's what the Gemara says. Why don't you just give an example and say, they say if this wine is just not bad for you, it doesn't have to be that the wine is good for you. It's enough to just say the wine isn't bad for you. And then your vow is not valid anymore. So Amar Rabbi Abba ve'od yafeh katani. Understand the Mishnah as they happen to find something that not only wasn't bad for you, but also was good for you. But theoretically, it could be that you could just say, oh, by the way, this wine isn't bad for your stomach. So you can, and then it would be undone as well. Same thing they're going to say about the onion. Right? Remember, it's ra lalev, it's bad for the heart. And then they say, what about this? This is good for the heart. So again, why don't you just say it's not bad for the heart? So Amar Rabbi Abba ve'od yafeh katani. Okay, and additionally, not only is it not bad for you, but also it's good for you. New Mishnah. If you remember, we started our chapter with Putchim b'chvod aviv v'imo. So now, right, and then we saw that the basic opinion was ein putchim b'chvod aviv v'imo, right? There was a machloket about it, but the rabbis basically said, you can't say, oh, had I known this was going to disrespect my parents. However, putchim la'adam b'chvod atzmo u'b'chvod banat. Well, you can't do it for your parents, you can do it for yourself. It's a matter of you are going to look bad, it's going to be disrespectful for you or disrespectful for your children, then you can. Now, this sounds like it totally is different from that other one. However, it's going to be clear that it's only in a very particular case. Okay, and then maybe it's almost similar to the one we saw. If it has to do with your parents, then you can undo it using your kvod aviv v'imo. So this case also is going to be a very particular case. What's the case? The case is the man, okay, we're going to have a lot of cases like this we're going to talk about today because this is our Mishnah. A man vows to not benefit from his wife. He's angry at his wife, takes a vow, I won't benefit from you, which basically means he has to divorce her. We saw this before, right? Like the tuba, for example. So now, if you knew that people on the street was going to say, oh, look at this guy, he divorces his wives, and they're going to speak badly about you. In other words, what happened? You took a vow not to have your wife benefit from you, which means you now have to divorce her, which means that now people on the street are going to start talking about you and saying, oh, look, this guy divorces his wives. Now, why is that a bad thing that people say that? First of all, we know that people do talk on the streets and say things, even if it's not really legitimate, but they do talk on the streets and it embarrasses people. Could be, and a lot of the commentaries think that often, like their assumption was, what's reason for divorce? Because the wife maybe was sleeping with some other man and that's why he divorced her. So they're going to talk about you like, oh, your wife cheated on you, right? Nobody wants to be in that kind of position where people are talking about him in that way. Could be that he cheated on his wife and that's why he's divorcing her and he's got eyes for somebody else. And that's another reason people could talk badly. So there's all sorts of reasons why people could talk badly, to which they say, right, people are going to start talking about you on the streets like this. Did you realize that? And then, by the word visto, they translate as darko, his way. Okay, this is the way of Ploni that he divorces his wives. Va'al benotecha. Now I want you to notice something interesting. It started with kvod atzmo and kvod banav. Okay, his children. Banav usually means male children, although it often includes female children. Here's a good example that banav can mean female children, because here it says bichvod banav. And how did they explain the case? Al benotecha. If you knew that people are going to say the following about your daughters, then you amrot benot grushot, and they're the daughters of a divorcee. What did their mother see to make her get divorced? Okay, so again, the idea here is that either, and there's also different girsa. One is, what did the mother see that made her get divorced? Maybe like she had eyes for some other man. Or mara'a bi'iman, what did he see in the mother that made him divorce her, basically? And then again, what did he see in her? Maybe he saw inappropriate behavior. And then people are going to talk about the daughters. If the mother's like that, right? Well, if the mother's in one way, people are going to assume the daughters are like that also. It will affect their ability to get married and all sorts of things. So again, now theoretically, you could say the same about sons, and it could be it's also about sons, even though it brings the example of daughters, I guess, like daughter, like mother, but could also be people would also talk about their sons, right? That's also true. They could question if the girls or the boys, for that matter, would be mamzerim. That's why it's less likely it's mamzerim, because that would apply to boys and girls as well. And here it really does seem to be talking about the girls, even though, again, could be the boys, could be anything. So basically, im amal, the amal, ilo ayiti odeh sheken lo ayiti nodeh, harei ze mutar. If you said, oh, I didn't realize that was going to happen, I don't always think about all the ramifications of my actions. I was just angry at her, so I said, don't benefit. I didn't realize, that means divorce. And if divorce means, right, you have to think a few steps ahead. And we'll talk later. We'll end our Gemara today with a story about someone who wasn't thinking too much. So here you see that he can use that as a petach. Konam shani noseet plonit ki'ura v'harei na'a. Okay, this is a total quote from something the Mishna that we quoted yesterday. He vows that he will not marry a woman because she's ugly. V'harei na'a, and it turns out she's not ugly, but she was beautiful. Shchora v'harei levana, dark and she was light. Tzara v'harei aruka, he won't marry her because she's short, and it turned out she was tall. Mutarba. Okay, here, no, you don't need to annul, to dissolve the vow. The vow is just not existent. Because it's a mistake. Okay, this is an important line, especially for the continuation. Not because, this is not the case if she really was ugly and became beautiful. She was dark and became light. She was short and she became tall. This is just that it was a mistake, okay? In other words, if something changed, but it was actually true at the time of the vow, then that wouldn't be the case here, that it would just not be, it would just be non-existent, this vow. No, this is only because the neder was a total mistake. And now we get a case. And usually the case comes to prove the halacha. Now, you tell me, think about whether this case proves or disproves the halacha. And it's a very strange story. He didn't want to marry his niece. Okay, they were pushing him to marry the niece. The niece is one of the arayot, one of the relatives who's not arayot can actually marry, and that's why people like to marry in the family. So they often give this case of bat achoto. He didn't want to marry the niece, and right, the daughter, his sister's daughter, which is not forbidden. They brought her to the house of Rabbi Yishmael, okay, the hair salon, the makeover place. Okay, now surprising spot to find it in the house of Rabbi Yishmael. And none other than Rabbi Yishmael, who, right? And he himself made her look beautiful. He gave her a makeover, gave her some nice clothes, did a whole thing to her. Okay, very strange why he, why he would do this and why this is his occupation, so to speak. It seems a little bit odd, right? It certainly wasn't an occupation. I don't think he made money off this. He did this out of the goodness of his heart. So, it seems like a strange place for a rabbi to be, but we're going to see why he actually thought this is exactly where a rabbi is supposed to be. This is what the rabbi needs to deal with as well. Okay. And I see you're saying that these examples of these men not marrying to marry women, but again, I want you to understand it in the context. I think we can very much relate to it today. Like imagine someone's pushing you into a shidduch that you don't want to be in, right? So you basically take a vow so that they leave you alone. It's like, and I know it's hard to put these in the same category, but it's the same as the person pushing you to eat a meal in their house. And then they say, I vow I'm not going to come into your house. Because whenever people are pushy about something, the pushback is, don't do this. Okay. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. I was going to say this. So I'll say it now since you already pointed out, which is Shuli Mishkin wrote a whole article about Rabbi Yishmael and talking about who he was in general and how that fits in with the story about why he was the one who was beautifying women. And we'll see the Mishna goes on to say this was not a one-time occurrence. Amar lo Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael now says to him, he does this makeover to this woman. And then he says, Bini, mizona darta? Is this the woman you vowed from? Because she was ugly. Like, she's this beautiful woman. Amar lo lav. He says, no way, that wasn't the woman. Vihitira Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Yishmael permitted her to marry him. Okay, permitted him, right? That he can now marry her if he wanted to. Bota sha'a bacha Rabbi Yishmael. At that moment, now again, why the Mishna is telling you this? Good question. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. At that moment, Rabbi Yishmael cried, V'amal benot Yisrael na'oten. The women of Israel are actually beautiful. Ela shahaniyut menavaltan. But poverty made them look bad. In other words, any woman you see who's not beautiful really is beautiful. It's just because of her poverty that she doesn't have the right clothes, she doesn't have the right way to do her hair, she doesn't have the right way, she can't afford makeup, maybe whatever it is. That's what's preventing them from looking beautiful. Again, a strange thing for a rabbi to be saying. But again, this is not in the way nowadays we have rabbis who are doing inappropriate things with women. And, throughout the generations, I'm sure that has happened. That is not the situation here. This is just a rabbi who put himself in a way to make shalom bayit with a husband and wife and got involved in helping this woman to improve her look. Whether he did it himself or he had people in his house who did it is also a good question. I'm not sure that he necessarily was the one doing it, but Yipua, he made sure she ended up looking beautiful. That's also another way to look at it, which might make a little more sense to us. Ukishim, like this was, we always have people, leaders, whether they're rabbis or leaders of communities or people who just put themselves in the situation and say, this is something that's important to me. We're going to see throughout the stories we're going to see today about rabbis who felt that I'll do anything for shalom bayit, either for getting people married or for helping to strengthen relationships with people who are already married to each other. So now, Ukishamet Rabbi Yishmael, when he died, Hayu benot Yisrael nosot kinav omrot, the women of Israel made a special lamentation for him because they really appreciated all the work he did to help these women, and said the following. Benot Yisrael, they've said these words. Benot Yisrael Rabbi Yishmael b'chena. The women of Israel or the daughters of Israel are crying over Rabbi Yishmael. B'chenu omer b'Shaul, and it's the same thing said by Shaul. Benot Yisrael al Shaul b'chena. The women of Israel or the daughters of Israel are crying over the death of Shaul HaMelech. And we'll quote that pasuk in a few minutes. We'll see it a little bit more in depth, and we'll see why that was the pasuk they chose here to connect. To which the Gemara starts off and says, 1 minute. Ma'aseh listor. This ma'aseh seems to be contradicting the halacha because the Mishna was very, very clear that what? Only if she was beautiful at the time, but if she was ugly at the time and then became beautiful, that's what we call nolad, right? That's what we saw previously. It wasn't the case at the time of the neder. It's not a neder ta'ut. It wasn't a mistake. She really was ugly. And then he made her beautiful. So later she was beautiful, but when he took the vow, it was actually accurate. So this would be a case of nolad, which there's a whole machloket about it, and the rabbis actually prove not. In any case, it definitely goes against our Mishna because our Mishna said specifically not if she was ugly and became beautiful. That wouldn't work. So it's very strange that the Mishna would bring a halacha and then bring a situation that contradicts without kind of specifying that it contradicts. To which the Gemara says, there's words missing, and really it contradicts, and they tell you it contradicts. And let's read this, although I am going to read this in two different ways that maybe he doesn't contradict, but let's read it the first way. Rabbi Yishmael, the Mishna said, if she was ugly and then became beautiful, or all the others, then it's not a neder ta'ut. To which Rabbi Yishmael comes and says, no, it does work, okay? And and then he brings this case to prove his point. And then the assumption would be that Rabbi Yishmael believes that it's nolad, and nolad is permitted like Rabbi Eliezer. And basically, he's not saying it's a neder ta'ut. It's not a neder ta'ut. It's just, I disagree with you about that. And when the Mishna says hitiruha, what does it mean hitiruha? He dissolved the vow, as opposed to, there was the case of the neder ta'ut. This isn't a neder ta'ut, but this is nolad, and I agree with nolad, in which case we don't hold like Rabbi Yishmael, because we hold like the rabbis who don't believe in nolad. You can't use nolad. That's one way of reading the sugya, but other people read it. Gita, I didn't read your whole note, although maybe you're saying this, but the second way of reading it is that it's not nolad at all. And hitiruha means that he didn't even need to dissolve the vow. The vow was really a neder ta'ud, and why? And this, I think, is a very beautiful idea. And it fits exactly with why it says that Rabbi Yishmael said this line about Bnei Yisrael are really beautiful, but the poverty makes them look ugly, which is, this is a neder ta'ud because she really was beautiful. The fact that she didn't look beautiful at the time doesn't mean she wasn't beautiful. She was beautiful. You just couldn't see it. She had layers of dirt on her. She had disheveled hair. She had ugly clothes, and she just looked bad. But she really was beautiful. And that, I think, is a much better pshat here, which is that either you say the Maaseh Listor, what was coming to contradict, in which you say, yes, it was coming to contradict, but there was a line of a transition in there. Okay, and then really it is coming to contradict, and he holds by Nola. Or you say that this whole situation, there's no such thing as, right, she was beautiful to begin with, and he just changed her to make her, right, to bring out her real natural beauty, and he didn't change anything, and the reality was she was beautiful at the time. And then really it's a neder ta'ut. So I think that's a nicer way of looking at it, and a nice way of understanding it. And this wasn't my explanation. There's a split among the commentaries about how to understand this Gemara. Moving now to Amabet, there's another version of this story, not a different version, but an addition to the story. This happens with stories. You'll end up in different places with different versions. Shein totevet haitala. She had a fake tooth. Basala Rabbi Yishmael, shein shel zahav mishelo. And Rabbi Yishmael, here you see he even paid his own money. He took his own money and bought her a gold tooth to put in her teeth to make her mouth look more beautiful. Kishachiv Rabbi Yishmael, and when he died, petach alehu safdana hachi, the person who was doing the lamentations for the eulogies for his death, said the following: Bnei Yisrael Rabbi Yishmael b'chena. Okay, instead of in our Mishna, it's the Bnei Yisrael. In this source, it says the one who was giving the eulogy said that the daughters of Israel al Rabbi Yishmael b'chena. And now we quote the pasuk, what b'chena? Hal malbishchen, okay, v'chule. This is the actual pasuk with that they said about Shaul HaMelech. And notice this is Hamal Bishchen, who dresses you. Okay, in other words, Shaul HaMelech dressed the women in fine clothing, fine silk, it says there, and jewels. And they say the same thing about Rabbi Yishmael, because he did the same thing that Shaul HaMelech did. Again, what exactly the simple reading is there of what exactly Shaul HaMelech did, I don't know. I don't think he did the same thing here that Rabbi Yishmael did, but they used that pasuk, which seemed to say he's the one who's giving them clothing and all that. Okay, now we're going to start our sidra of our section of stories. We're going to have 4 stories. 3 are connected with vows, and the 4th is the one I told you about, the mixed marriage between a Babylonian and a woman from Eretz Israel, and the problems of communication that they have. Okay, and that one doesn't have to do with vows, but you'll see how it connects with the other stories. How de Amar la Debitu? Okay, Debitu is his wife. So a man says to his wife, I take a vow that you will not benefit from me. She was obviously a terrible cook. And he said to her, if you don't, I'm vowing you're not going to be able to benefit from me unless you go serve your disgusting food to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, okay, which is humiliating to her, humiliating to the rabbis. So what happens? Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm going to eat this, okay? I know this food's disgusting. I understand the background to the story, and I'm willing to humiliate myself, be part of this man's crazy vow in order to make shalom bayit here, okay, right? Shalom bayit being peace between husband and wife. Amar kavachomer. He said the following kavachomer, because the truth is, it's not his to decide. It's an embarrassment to the Torah, really. He's a representative, a Talmud scholar, and what he does is not just, it's not respectful to me, it's not respectful to the Torah. So on what basis is he allowed to do this? Well, he said to himself the following kavachom: Umala asot shalom ben ish lishto, in order to create peace between husband and wife. Amra Torah, the Torah said, shemi shmi shenichta b'kedusha, my name is written in holiness. Yimache alamayim amararim b'safek, can be dissolved in the waters, the bitter waters, out of a doubt. Okay, let me explain all these words. In the case of a sota, a man is concerned his wife is with some other man. So he takes her to we're going to get into all this in Masechet Sota. I'm not going to get into all the details, but one of the things they do in the process is they write the name of God, because they write the whole parsha of Sota, and then they dip it in this bitter waters, where they write part of the parsha of Sota. We'll get to what exactly is written in there. They dip it in the bitter waters. In there is the name of God. And the name of God, when you put parchment in water, the name dissolves, which you're not allowed to erase the name of God. But in order to, now let's go to the last word there, out of safek, possibly bring shalom b'nish lishto. Why possibly? Well, if her belly, swells and she explodes, then it's a sign that she was a sota. And then that's the end of the marriage and she's got, that's it. But if she's proven correct that she wasn't lying and she really wasn't with this man, then they go back and have a happy marriage. Now, again, we'll get into, after her husband accused her of all this, how could they have a happy marriage? We'll put that aside for right now. We'll talk about that when we get to Masechet Sota. But the point is that now they can go back and be happily married and you won't be suspicious of her anymore. So in the name of shalom bayit, peace between husband and wife, we even allow the name of God to be erased. So of course, I can stoop down to the low level of this husband and eat this terrible food. So now they say, right, so va'ani halacha kama v'kama, all the more so I should be doing this. Rabbi Shimon, as usually, disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, low time. He wasn't willing to eat. What did he say? Amal, very harsh line, but you'll see why in a minute. Yamutu kol b'nei almana, all the sons of this widow should die. Now, she's not a widow, she's married. What does this mean? It means not only should her husband die and she becomes widowed, her son should die. Remember, we learned that ba'avon nidarim banim metim, that for the sin of nidarim, Rabbi Shimon was upset with this person that took a vow. He says, what? I'm going to make the Torah look bad because of this crazy man who took a neder when he was angry? Like, I don't need to get involved in that. Nedarim are bad. It's his problem. And va'al yazuz Shimon mimkomo. And I'm not moving anywhere. I'm not going to taste that disgusting food. That is beneath my kavod. And for what? For some man who got himself into a situation. It's his fault, not my problem. And ve'od ki hechedilo letargale lemindar. And not only that, but if I eat this food, it's going to create a bad precedent. People are going to think it's okay to vow, and then they can always just, get out of it somehow. So I definitely don't want to be involved in that. So we have this split here. All the other stories, there's only going to be one opinion, and it's going to be shalom bayit is everything. But this one is really saying this man got himself into a bad situation, and I'm not willing to get him out of it. Also, he's worried about what precedent it will set. Now, obviously, the woman is a victim here, that's for sure, and there's no way around it. But he just thinks that it's a very bad precedent, and maybe he's trying to protect future women from their husband making these terrible vows and then being stuck with them, and he doesn't want that to happen. Hahuda Amar Lidabitu, story number 2. I will not stay, you will not benefit from me until you spit in Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, he was not only, right, he was the Nasi, he was a prominent person, a prominent rabbi, and wealthy, and, you're going to spit on him. Well, that's pretty harsh. Atat urakaka lavushe. Well, what'd she do? She said, I'm going to outsmart him. I'm going to spit on his clothing. So I won't really spit on him, but it'll be like spitting on him. So now, and then they said, okay, now you can stay married because she fulfilled the vow. To which, against the vow, right? So that the vow would not be fulfilled. But he wanted to humiliate both her and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and that wasn't humiliating. To which he says, what do you mean? Ravina says, just spitting on his clothing is pretty humiliating. It doesn't have to be on his actual body. Story number 3. Man says to his wife, same start to all these stories, right? You will not benefit from me. Now, don't be fooled. Mum is usually a blemish. Here, mum means mi'uma, like in Hebrew language, there's mi'uma, which is anything. You have to show something of yourself that's beautiful to Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. What he's basically saying is, you're ugly as can be. You have nothing beautiful to say for yourself. If you can prove to this rabbi that you have something beautiful about you, then I'll stay married to you. Otherwise, forget about it. So Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi wants to save this marriage. So what does he do? Amar lahem shema roshana. He says maybe her head is beautiful. It's interesting. He's talking to his people. Like, I guess he doesn't really see her, but he asked his people to go check her out. Amulo skalgal. They said no. Her head is round. It's really not a very beautiful head. Shema sa'ara na'a. Maybe her hair is nice. Domela anitze pishtan. It looks like strands of flax. She doesn't have good hair. Shema einehano. Maybe her eyes are beautiful. Trutoten. Okay, trutot is a word we've seen before. There's all different options, whether they're narrow, they're round, they're something that's not a normal way of eyes being. And no, sorry, they're not. Shema oznehano. Maybe her ears are beautiful. He's trying for anything. So kfuloten, they're folded over. In other words, they're so big that they like fold over, and they look double. They're really ugly ears. Shema chotmana. Maybe her nose. Balumhu, it's what's the word they translate balum? It's I forgot the word I saw in the English translation, so can help me with it, but it's like a pudgy nose, like either squeeze closed or stubby. That was the word I was looking for in the Koran. They use stubby. Okay, some sort of either something that's not a nice nose. Shema siptotano, maybe her lips are nice. Avoten, they're very thick. Shema tzavarana, maybe her neck is nice. Shakutu, it's very short. Shema kresana, maybe her stomach. Savehi, it's bloated. Shema raglanaot, rechavot kishalavaza. Her legs, they're wide like goose, like geese. Shema shmana, maybe her name is nice. Okay, like he says, okay, forget about her body, forget about the way she looks. Maybe she has a nice name. Lichluchitshma, her name is Dirt. Okay. Amar lahen, yafe korim ota lichluchit. I found something good about her. Good, they call her dirty woman. She'im luchlechet b'mumim, because she's dirty. She's full of mumim. Her name is perfectly suited to who she is. That's a nice thing about her. And sharia, and he permitted the neder based on that. Okay, interesting creative story. Obviously a bit exaggerated. I'm sure there was probably something they could have found in her that was nice. But the idea basically being, that anything they could find to make the neder not come true and allow them to stay married, they're willing to do. Okay, now we get to our immigrant marriage, our mixed marriage here. Halu bar Bavel desalik la'aret Yisrael. So a Babylonian guy comes on Aliyah to Israel, and he meets a woman, Nasiv Itata. He marries a local Israeli woman. Amar la bashili le tre talfe. Now here we start the translation or cultural gap between the two. He says, make me 2 lentils. Now in Babylonia, 2 lentils meant, I guess, a small lentil dish or something. So bashila le tre talfe. She takes him very literally, and she makes him 2 lentils. Okay, try to cook 2 lentils. I don't know how you do that. But she literally makes him 2 lentils. Ratahala. He gets super angry at her because he had no dinner. That was his dinner. He was starved. He gets very angry. Limachar, the next day, Amarla bashilele griva. He says, make me a portion, like a nice portion. Bashilele griva. So she makes him a huge portion. Okay, I see you're asking, Emma, if we learned this before. So I want to point out, we didn't learn this. We had a different problem with lentils. There was a whole thing with the lentils. The son was right? He would ask for something and the son would translate into something else. It was another story that had to do with lentils, but it wasn't this story. So he says, make me a sizable portion. So what does she do? But she makes him a huge portion. We say like to feed an army, okay, even though it was just the two of them. And she made a huge amount of food. So in this case, it doesn't say he got angry with her because, at least he had food to eat, but it was very wasteful. You could see he would get angry, like, why did you waste all that food? But not as angry as the first case. Amarle zil aitele kre butsine. Then he says, bring me 2 butsine. Now, butsine is translated either as watermelons or it's translated as gourds. Okay, that's the way he knew the word butsine. But in Israel, the word butsine meant something else. This is like if you talk about England and America, sometimes the same words that are used in both places, but mean something totally different. Like a jumper, a sweater, right? All these words. So she brings 2 candles. Now, what do we mean by candles? Not the candle like the wax, but the vessel that the candle goes in, that you would pour the oil into, and then you put a wick in. So it's like a little earthenware vessel. So she brings him 2 of those when he wanted food, right? And instead she brings him this. Okay, Amarla, now he's very angry at this point. After the 3rd story already, his wife doesn't understand anything of what he wants. Amarla, zile tavra yatona resha de baba. So he says, go break those on the head of the door, okay? Meaning like the doorpost. Go break those on the doorpost. I'm so angry with you. That is absolutely not what I wanted. Go break them on the doorpost, okay? But he said it in the words, al resha de baba, which in a minute you're going to see can be translated some other way. And here comes the funny part of the story. Well, at the same time, Havayativ Bava ben Buta, you can already see the similarity, a person named Bava, whose name was Bava ben Buta, who is a Talmid Chacham, says he's sitting abava, he's sitting by the door. There's obviously this play here of Bava sitting at the Bava. Okay, the Bava is like the gate. The Kadain Dina, often by the gates, they would judge cases. So he was sitting by the gate, not clear with the gate of what, maybe the gate of the city, maybe she just totally misunderstood. And he thought, go break it on Reshe, now not the head of the door, but the head of Bava ben Buta. So what does she do? This very obedient wife who wants to do exactly, right? You see this, right? She wants to do exactly what her husband says. She takes him very literally and doesn't exactly understand him. Azot utavart yatona Reshe. So she goes right over to Bava ben Buta and breaks these utensils these kelim on his head, and she throws them at him. Well, you can imagine his surprise. Amarla, ma hadin da'ava. What did you just do? Can't help but laugh at this story. Amrele, she says to him, kach tzivani ba'ali, and she says in this very, right, Amelia Bedelia, it's true, it's totally Amelia Bedelia. She says, but that's what my husband told me to do, like in this very innocent, naive way, like I was just following orders. Amal, now here, let's see his reaction. Okay, now if we take the stories before as our witness, so either we take the Rabbi Shimon approach, your husband took these vows, but there were no vows, so you can't take that approach. So if we take the shalom bayit approach, that we're going to do anything, what does he say? He looks at the positive and he says, At asit ritzon ba'alech. You did exactly what your husband wanted. Now, it wasn't really what he wanted, but you had all the best intentions in mind. All you really wanted to do was follow your husband. Well, she gets the best reward a woman could get, right? And for her husband, all the more so, you're going to have sons that are Talmidei Chachamim. And what's he trying to do again? In order to make peace between the husband and wife and try to tell the husband, you know what? Look on the bright side, right? You might, and this is a great lesson for all relationships, right? Whether it's a marital relationship, whether it's a parent-child relationship, right? Try to see the other side, that while she wasn't understanding him and she obviously wasn't using her seichel and her intelligence in any way, and she doesn't look great in this story, but she was trying to be a good wife. And again, nowadays we would not define being a good wife as following exactly what your husband says, but she was trying to, she wanted really for this to work. And she was trying to do exactly what he says. And she, so understand sometimes when you have communication problems, sometimes it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of wanting to, we always say, like, you never really know the way someone else is thinking. Like, you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to help them, but sometimes trying to help is actually just gets them more angry at you. But really notice that they're trying to help and understand that. And that puts a whole twist on the whole, difficulty in comprehending. And he, again, puts positive side on, looks at the optimistic, kind of like the rabbi who tried to find something good in the woman, right? And always important to try to look at the positive, and especially when it's a case of shalom bayit and making peace between husband and wife. And with that, Hadran Rabbi Eliezer, we finished the 9th chapter, and we will start in the next Shiur, the 10th chapter, which, as I said, I said this in the beginning class, you might not remember anymore, but there's a good lead-in to the next sugya, which is all about a husband and a father having the rights to annul the vows of their daughter or wife, and which is a complicated topic. So I read the last line. I didn't read Naram or Asa. Is that what you're saying? I read the last line of the Gemara that Hamakom Yotzimi Mechshnei Banim Kavav Mabuta. So in any case, we now have a lead-in to relationship between husband and wife, and with that, the complicated nature of a husband being allowed to annul his wife's vows, which is a whole big question, and we'll talk about that in the next class. Shabbat shalom to everybody. Good stories to think about.